to the Point with Michael Williams.
Headed into yet another pivotal time for Lake Okeechobee. The lake level is dropping, and a lot of concern there out and around the lake. If there's an algae season, it would begin soon, and at the same time, Congress is taking up key proposals affecting the big lake at the heart of our South Florida water system. Good morning and welcome. The lake has become a major issue in our area, both environmentally and politically. In many ways, it's been that forever. Joining me to talk about that and more is Republican Congressman Brian Mast, whose district includes part of the lake area, Martin, St. Lucie, and parts of North Palm Beach County. You have a wide reach here and wide coverage. Thank you for coming in. Let's talk overview first. There have been some complaints of late. We'll let you address those, but talk about the work you're doing up on the Hill as we talk about this delicate balance we're trying to achieve with the lake in terms of water levels, in terms of abating, reducing discharges that can create algal blooms, in terms of creating a reservoir that helps the Everglades.
Right.
I know that's a lot to bite off. It's a big picture, but you've been tackling it. Give us the 50,000-foot level first.
50,000 foot, Herbert Hoover Dike fully funded. That means that in times of major storms, when it's repaired, lake levels can stay at a higher level on the lake without having discharged water to the east and west coast. Authorized a reservoir both at the state level and the federal level to take water out of the lake, put it into that reservoir. Still has to be built, but put it into the reservoir again instead of sending water out to the east and west coast of Florida. Working on other projects like the Kissimmee River restoration, the bridging of the Tamiami Trail so more water can flow south, flow equalization basins, working on regulations out there relating to making sure that communities are notified when there's discharges of toxic water, Toxic Discharge Threat Notification Act. Obviously, a revamping of the South Florida Water Management District, which has a great deal to do with what goes on with water management, and the Corps of Engineers working on something known as LOSOM, which used to be known as LORS, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, where they're going to adjust the levels that the lake can be kept at.
We'll talk about levels more in a moment. It's been a point of contention of late with the lake right now below 11 feet, lower than it's been in a few years. We'll talk about that in just a second. People have been hearing for years, you and I have been talking about it for years, the money for the reservoir. It's going to take about 8 to 10 years to build, but the money is there definitively. You called it an historic achievement. There's no stopping that money now for the reservoir south of the lake.
So what we did this year was we got an appropriation, $200 million. Actually, there's a little bit more than that in a few different buckets. But to match what the state of Florida has done previously, federal government's only been putting up about $70 million for these South Florida ecosystem restoration projects. So to have this finally come through, $200 million, hopefully we can get this done year after year after year. Big accomplishment for all things surrounding reservoir. Those appropriations are not just designated to reservoir, but it is anticipated that the South Florida Water Management District and the Corps of Engineers will sign those contracts together very soon, and they'll be able to start moving dirt on that reservoir project again very soon.
And on the Herbert Hoover Dike, 2022 is now a firm timeline, firm deadline with the money in hand?
My hope is even sooner, hopefully some time frame in 2021. Again, those were reports that we got from the Corps of Engineers with what they get to do operationally, with having every dollar appropriated to the project. They can plan out for construction in ways that they couldn't otherwise do if they're worrying about, hey, are we going to get the money next year or the year after or the year after? Now they can plan for it and they can get it done sooner.
The dike repair, let's say it's done in 2022, is critically important, as you've said, for safety around the lake. But it's not the end-all be-all, as interests out there say, and as you well know. And in fact, people are concerned now. We've got a rainy season that started and then stopped, a lake below 11 feet as you and I sit here and speak. The argument was keep lake levels lower, let submerged seagrasses have a chance to rebuild. They're wonderful as nurseries also for the fisheries out there. But now the complaint is, even though it may help prevent algal blooms in the summer, you and others have been criticized. In fact, you've heard the quote by now saying from some out at the lake, he's representing, quote, the wealthy coastal elite who see our lake as a problem and our people as a nuisance. They were talking about lake levels being kept lower this year, and right now they're saying, see, this is what happens. We've got some dry weather. Look what's going on.
I think the pushback would be that many of the folks around the lake see those on the coast as a nuisance for not wanting discharges. But it's really a problem that we fix two issues of the problem by lowering Lake Okeechobee levels. So why do we get discharges? We get them because the lake is too high. Why does that matter? Because the communities south of the lake are put at risk because the Herbert Hoover Dike could breach. So if the lake levels are too high, those folks are, and you've covered this, 2017, those communities clamoring, listen, you need to take the water off the lake, you need to bail us out, not complain about those discharges because people could die. That's a very real fear. But when we lower the lake levels, we reduce that risk, and we also reduce the risk of communities to the east and west coast having to get literally toxic discharges. How toxic? The U.S., the EPA literally just came out last weekend for the first time, set forth a standard saying any level of cyanobacteria over 8 parts per billion, toxic for human health, very toxic. Perspective on this, last summer we were getting discharges of 450 parts per billion. That's very serious. We need to do everything that we can so we're not putting toxins into these communities. That's what this is about.
It's been the whole story of this lake's history long before you assumed office, long before this latest debate about overshooting, undershooting, wet season, dry season. It's one of the reasons we talk about the need for reservoirs for precisely this back and forth that we have if it's too wet or too dry in any particular year. I've seen this debate going on for the last 40 years, and it's been longer than that. Do you think this will help solve it with the pieces we're putting in place so that people on the lake don't feel that they're being hurt and we find that equilibrium? Is that really achievable?
It is, and it's all, like you said, it's all different pieces that have to work together. It's not just any one thing that we do, but let's look at the numbers on it. 9 of the last 11 years, under previous management, 9 of the last 11 years, massive discharges to the east and west coast of Florida, which means too much water was kept on the lake. There was too much water that came into the system, too much was kept on. Only 1 year of drought conditions. Now, we don't want to see any drought conditions, but that's an untenable situation where the coasts are asked to bear all of the burden when the east coast of Florida, areas like Martin and St. Lucie County, they don't bear any benefit of having water discharged into the area. The water is being kept on the lake by those same individuals south of the lake that are now saying, at one point, hey, you need to send all the water out because our homes are at risk. But then they were the first ones to raise their hand and say, no, we don't want a reservoir, which could prevent discharges. And then they were the first to raise their hand and say, no, listen, we don't want to lower the levels of the lake before hurricane season, even though it could help the other communities. They want to keep more water on the lake. That's a little bit of a double standard. It's kind of like having your cake and eating it too.
The lake levels are continuing to be debated. You talked about that a few minutes ago. Let's circle back to that. One article recently said Lake Okeechobee lower level debated among stakeholders. We've talked about that. The Army Corps won't repeat in 2020. Where will we end up with new Lake Okeechobee water height, water regulation schedules? How will that play out?
So one of the things that you see through LOSOM, that's the process actually in law where it becomes a regulation. When LOSOM gets put into place, you're probably going to see being a higher end on Lake Okeechobee where the water can go to in times of emergency without having to worry about that dike breaching. That's the goal of the Herbert Hoover dike repairs. Raise the top end of where water currently is. You're probably going to see an opening up at the bottom end as well to say we can still meet water supply needs with the lake coming down to this level. Actually, in current regulation, in current Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule, that's what was written back in 2008 by all the stakeholders around the lake coming together. They wrote in that regulation schedule 10.5 feet and above that is still in the beneficial use band. It's not in a drought condition. And that's where I'm saying, listen, if we can bring the lake down to levels, 11 feet, 10.5 feet, the water managers are saying everybody can still get their water, which is what the South Florida Water Management District has said. Their executive director has said it very directly. Their previous executive director has said that very directly. If everybody can still get their water supply needs met and we can reduce the risk to the communities south of the lake and we can reduce the risk of discharges because we've given that much more buffer in the lake, then we did a good thing. We did something good with management. That's what we're trying.
Briefly, and I say briefly because we could talk about it forever, but I do want to talk some other issues going on the Hill. South of the lake, there's also always a contentious debate about the role ag interest, including the sugar industry, need to play in terms of land, in terms of usage, in terms of even more water flow that many environmentalists argued needed above and beyond the reservoir to help clean, cleanse, and revitalize at least part of the glades. Where do we stand there? Because many still see that it's contentious. Ag interests say, hey, we're here, we need to be here, we supply jobs. Others say the Everglades can't fully recover unless we move with ag interests, including Big Sugar, and demand more help from them.
So let's bring ag, municipal water supply, and Everglades all together at once. So if I had a chart, I'd show you a chart right now where it shows how much water agriculture asked for in 2018. The number was about 860 billion gallons of water. That's about 6 foot of water off of Lake Okeechobee that they requested for their use. To put that into perspective, City of West Palm Beach gets maybe 20 to 30 billion gallons of water for their use. Municipalities like West Palm Beach, the whole county, other counties, they're clamoring for more water. They want more water. They're trying to plan for growth in these areas. They're not allowed to have more water. Now, even though ag was authorized that much water, they only used about 400 billion gallons of it.
And in fact, parenthetically, the municipalities have complained about these lower water levels of late because it's a backup water supply.
That's right, two grassy waters. That brings in another problem. We can get to that in a minute if we still have time. But when when agriculture asks for 860 billion gallons of water, only uses 400 billion gallons of water, that all has to be accounted for. The lake is at an artificially high level. Communities like the East and West Coast have to take discharges. But then you have communities that are looking for municipal drinking water supply, and they're not allowed to get it. They're not authorized an increased amount of water, even though there's this other entity out there asking for double what they're actually going to use. It's like when I take my kids to the restaurant and they say they want 2 burgers when I know they're only going to eat 1. It's a wrong situation.
We can talk about this endlessly because it's of such vital importance, but I do want to talk about some other topics that you either have been or soon are going to be quizzed about. I'll be among the first. The Mueller report out. The special counsel said the other day, Robert Mueller, quote, "If we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said that." That one quote has reignited the debate on both sides of the aisle about A, do we leave this lie? B, some on the Hill, Democrats saying it's time for impeachment proceedings. What's your reaction to that quote?
Look, it is the right of everybody to go out there and put the administration, any member of Congress, the Senate, under scrutiny. That's anybody's right, and it should happen for good governance. But when you go out there and you look at the $30 million that was spent, the hundreds of subpoenas that have taken place, all of the interviews that individuals from the administration were subjected to, there was no cover-up. There was complete transparency with this. Maybe, Mr. Mueller couldn't go out there and conclusively say one way or the other, but he didn't say either way. He didn't say this way, and he didn't say the other way. Now, in the House Democrats have proven this, in my opinion. Their goal is to do anything and everything that they can do to get rid of this president. To them, the ends justify the means. They're willing to go out there and say for 2 years straight, there was collusion, there was collusion, there was collusion. After that ended and it came that there wasn't collusion, there was no apology. There was no, hey, listen, we're sorry for misleading the American people for 2 years. It was an immediate, let's move on to the next way that we can try to push for impeachment. I think that's the problem.
But when you have Mr. Mueller saying on possible obstruction, if we had confidence he did not commit a crime, we would have said that, leaving people to put their own spin on that. That's not exoneration, or at least Democrats are arguing that.
And Democrats can go out there and argue that that's not exoneration, but there wasn't enough either to go out there and say there's conclusive statements that I can go out there and say this was the wrongdoing that occurred, and that didn't occur in the report either.
Do you think your Democratic colleagues will try to formally push for impeachment?
I think my Democratic colleagues have been preparing to push for impeachment for months, if not years.
More critically, you served this nation to defend our freedoms, and we thank you for that. The one point Mr. Mueller made most forcefully is that Russia definitively tried to interfere in our elections. The president really has not spoken about that much. In fact, his critics say he's not done nearly enough to take Russia and Vladimir Putin to task. Do you believe that Russia interfered in our election in 2016? Do you think Russia is going to try to interfere, as Mr. Mueller believes, in 2020?
There's no question that Russia interfered to me. When I go to European nations and speak to them, especially those that used to be part of the Eastern Bloc of Russia, to them it's a laughable situation because Russia has been interfering in their elections literally for decades. It's something that everybody knows that they do. Now let's put this into perspective. This did not occur under the Trump administration. This influence, this attempt to influence elections, this occurred under the Obama administration, an administration that didn't take Russia seriously on a number of different fronts.
Are you going to press the president? Are you going to press your fellow members of Congress to do more to tackle this problem before 2020?
We need to have confidence. Every person in America should have the right to confidence in their electoral system, that it's not being interfered by people from other countries or any other outside player, non-government organization, or any of the others. They should have that right. I want everybody to have that confidence, regardless of what party is winning any election.
And we'll be pressing for specific programs and funding to ensure that next year.
And there's been funding that's going on this. This is something that's been ongoing.
Congressman Mast, as always, we thank you. We could talk for hours on any one topic, but we appreciate the overview. As always, thank you for being our guest.
Always good to see you.
To the point, sir.